Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us for another week. I'm in a different location, but similar backdrop. And obviously, Andrew and Michael are still joining us from Ontario until TBD if they're going to be joining me out in Calgary anytime soon.
I'm joking. It's not on terrible. It's great.
That's awesome. So the main topic we thought we would chat about is recent announcements from the Trump administration down south in the U.S. that impact the H-1B visa scheme. So I'll describe it a little bit, and we can talk about essentially there's kind of two ways of looking at that, and one of them is again how does it impact the U.S. And as a corollary, how does it impact Canada and our potential opportunities for recruiting talent and retaining talent and stuff like that? So, as a bit of a background, the H-1B visa is a highly skilled migrant visa that is not intended to lead to citizenship. So when you apply for it, you're not essentially the federal government in the U.S. is saying this is not going to get you a green card. You have to find alternative means to get a green card and stay permanently. And the way that it was initially legislated was that there's an 85,000 person per year cap. And as a result, what ends up happening is that if you apply for an H-1B, including through an employer, there's essentially a lottery. So they put your name in the hat, and there's a fixed number of people that are eligible to get an H-1B visa, which allows them and all of their dependents to travel to the U.S. and work. Now, a couple things. There's kind of two sides to this coin, and it's created a lot of controversy, especially in the tech industry, because it's far and away the most prolific user of H-1B. So tech companies, far and away, I think it's something like 60 or 70% of all H-1B applications. And the inverse is there's huge proponents of it, such as Elon Musk, who I don't think he actually came to the U.S. originally from Canada, or I guess he came from South Africa via Canada I think he came on an O1 visa, which is a highly skilled, unique talent type visa rather than like essentially a work visa. Anyways, and so the two sides of the coin are it's clear, and part of the reason that the Trump administration has taken this action is that it's absolutely clear that the H-1B scheme is being abused. And the way that it's being abused is that there are typically large Indian outsourcing companies that will hire a ton of H-1B Indian nationals, and then they will go into the US and they will essentially offer domestic outsourcing services. So what they go into, let's say a Microsoft or somebody similar, and they say, we'll essentially provide you with a workforce at substantially reduced rate, typically substantially reduced rate. And it has a massive impact on displacing local talent. So a big challenge that we've seen in the tech industry, especially in the US, is that and definitely in Canada, we talked about this on the pod last week, there's a real shortage of jobs for young people, especially new graduates. And anybody that's graduating in anything related to technology, especially computer science, is having a really, really difficult time in the US getting a job at all, any job. And right or wrong, a lot of people in the industry, as well as other industries that are having similar issues, are pointing their finger at the scheme for the H-1B. And something that's kind of unusual is that the numbers of the H-1B have actually exceeded the lottery. So the last couple of years of the Biden administration, it seems like they just started admitting a ton more people than the legislated lottery cap. And I'm not entirely sure how those numbers came to be and how they were able to. But just as a summary, there's been a ton of people that have entered the country via the H-1B. Now, the inverse side of that is the Elon Musk argument and many others in the tech sphere and other industries that say this is the premier route of us hiring and the US companies hiring international standout talent. So if you're an AI researcher or you've got some unique skill that these companies in the US really, really want, it's pretty much their bread and butter in terms of how to bring people and emigrate them to the US and have them work for their companies. Now, one of the challenges, again, coming back to sort of the other side, is that when these companies do this, even if they're not displacing local workforce, which many argue they are, it's clear and from someone as my perspective, I used to work on a work visa in the UK, and I can empathize with the argument that the people that are on these H-1Bs, they're dependent on their employer, right? If their employer says, "Hey, I don't want to, maintain this visa or this position anymore," they have to leave the country, and they uproot their entire family, their kids, all of that. And so it's very clear, and I think there's a lot of evidence to support that H-1B holders are kind of beholden to their companies. And as a result, the companies typically push them a little bit harder, potentially longer hours, definitely typically less pay. And it's just really not a fair fight. So anyways, that's kind of the background on the H-1B system. And so the Trump administration last week announced that as going forward, this isn't retroactive. It doesn't impact current H-1B holders. And there was a bunch of misinformation about how it impacts existing holders. It's only applications, essentially sponsored applications going forward. Every single application has a one-time $100,000 fee. So what the Trump administration is essentially saying is this is this position that you're seeking a migrant visa for has to be such high value that you're prepared to spend $100,000 to get this person. And again, there's no guarantees that that person will stay an X number of years or whatever. You could probably amortize it over 5 or 10 years. But if that person comes and says, "I don't like the job," and they leave, you're still out of pocket $100,000. Alternatively, candidates that are, again, pushing that application themselves, they're going to have to cough up $100,000. So it's definitely going to gut the bottom end of the H-1B scheme, which I think most people would agree is a good thing. However, there's also a massive argument, and this dovetails with what we're talking about in Canada. There's a lot of people suggesting that it's too onerous. That amount of money is just simply cost prohibitive to bring over, still high class talent, but it's just not going to be justifiable, especially in the startup sphere or companies that don't have the cash. And so a lot of people have been suggesting that, okay, that these people are otherwise going to be going somewhere else, potentially capitals like London or Singapore, or potentially Toronto, Vancouver in Canada. And so is this going to be a boon for other countries, or is this really going to correct a lot of the shadiness and the grift in the current H-1B scheme and simply focus on bringing in the best and brightest where companies can afford to pay them? And to put this in perspective, if we're looking at, let's say, like cutting edge AI researchers, they typically come in on an O1. They don't need an H-1B. And so if you're Meta and you're paying somebody a $200 million pay package, $100,000 is nothing. But again, if those are the types of people that would typically come in on an O1. So it's going to be interesting to see if that actually has an impact on the higher end of the market, or it just absolutely guts it. So I guess, Michael, what are your thoughts on, this whole sort of controversy, and what's your perspective on how countries like Canada can potentially take advantage of this or clear up, how we're bringing in migrants? Because we haven't even touched on how Canada's system has changed. And there's been a lot of people that are unhappy with it. And, it sounds like the Carney government are actually making some changes. But what are your thoughts on that?
So it sounds like this H-1B is bringing in relatively skilled labor. By the sounds of it, by how you've described it with the $100,000 fee and how some of these tech companies are using it. But you said there's a bit of a scheme going on, and it's being exploited. It sounds like how does that compare to like some of the other visas? I know there's an H-2B visa, but that's more for like construction trades. Similar thing. There's no path to the green card, no path to residency. It is a shorter duration, I think 1 year, and you can keep renewing it. But how does that H-1B compare to the EB-3? Because I thought there was an EB-3 for the US that was for skilled workers in the professional fields. Like, what's the difference? I'm trying to look it up, and I see that the EB-3 actually gives them a direct path to permanent residency.
Yeah, so the EB visas are typically like internal transfers. I'd have to double check. And the other thing is that they got rid of the essentially the millionaire visa, where if you immigrated and you invested $10 million or something like that, and created X number of jobs, you'd be given a green card. They got rid of that, and they did Trump's what do they call it? The gold card, which is $1 million. And apparently they sold within his term, $1 million for a green card, and they sold apparently 5,000 of them. So
Are you
they made
sure they got rid of that one where you invest in and you get the green card? That was the EB5. Uh, I heard they were going to phase that out, but I don't think they've successfully done it yet, from what I've heard. But there's some controversy. So looking at the EB3, okay, that is, let's talk about employee ones first. That the requirement for that is 2 years of experience in like a skilled profession. And basically, you have to get a labor certification from the employer saying that the employer has to prove that there was no qualified U.S. worker available to fill that job. And then they have to have obviously a full-time U.S. job offer, 2 years of experience, and then this gives them like a direct path to permanent residency, but it can take years. So that's another way. Like I'm just trying to figure out how that EB3 differs from the H1B for employees.
Yeah, so for what I can find, so the EB5 was the immigrant investor visa. So up
Correct.
to 1 million
Yep.
invested in the US,
Yep. X amount of employees.
residency, so you get a green card, and you have to
Yep.
create at least 10 jobs for domestic workers.
Correct. And I think that's still in effect, if I'm not mistaken.
Could be, makes sense. And then the typical path also similar path for business investors is the E1 or E2. So those are people that again create a business, but there's a longer, like you say, there's a longer path to citizenship, and it needs to be renewed until you qualify for permanent
Yeah,
residency.
and the E2 actually doesn't convert into citizenship. You would have to, like I've done some research. So how the E2 works is, you have to do a substantial investment into the U.S. as a business, and typically a minimum of about $100,000. And then, yeah, you're renewing it. I think it's annually you're renewing it, or every 2 years you're renewing it, and eventually you can basically convert that into an EB5 once you're eligible, because the EB5 requirements are higher. At that point, you would have had to invest about $1 million US dollars into the economy or into your business, and also, like you said, had those minimum of 10 employees. So then you transfer it to an EB5, and then you're on the path to citizenship. But the E2 itself doesn't grant you citizenship, and you have to renew it every 2 years. You basically have to convert it to an EB5 to get citizenship.
Yeah, so that makes sense to me. The one thing I don't particularly understand on the H1B side, which is also a source of a lot of controversy, is that you essentially you apply for the H1B status, and then in order for it to convert, so you have to renew it, and then when you qualify for a green card again, you've been in the country for 5 or 10 years or whatever that is, then you can apply for a green card. And in order for that to happen, your employer has to say, um, it's essentially the same thing as a work visa, right? You have to demonstrate to the Department of Labor at that point in time that there are no domestic candidates that could do the job. So it's ironic because you don't have to do that on the front end, but you have to do it on the permanent side. So when you take an employee on an H1B, essentially it's just a lottery to start with. And then if you keep them for 5 years and you want them to stay, you have to make this permanent application. And
See.
it's interesting because there's a couple people have created websites in the US which allow local Americans, naturalized Americans and citizens, to apply to these jobs. So they have to be posted, similar to a work permit. They have to be posted somewhere, but many people believe that the way that they're posted and how they're posted is really shady in order to try and get around this sort of, there can't be any other candidates. And so they've created websites that essentially post all of these perm H1B conversions to say, hey guys, like there's tons of candidates for these jobs, right? Like this is just not what this program was designed for. And it's caused a lot of issue, especially with these large outsourcing firms, because they just can't, they can't trade if people are going to be competing with them. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
anyways,
how it's being exploited. That's how it's being exploited, basically. Makes sense. Okay, and it looks like there's 85,000 visas granted a year. So that's the lottery. So the lottery is if you happen to get one of these $85,000 visas. Obviously, you have to still be eligible based on all the requirements you mentioned, and then it does have that path to green card based on employer sponsorship. So I I don't know. Like I think this all dovetails back to Trump's platform of creating jobs for Americans. I guess if you have these skilled laborers coming to the country, On one hand of one side of things, you're bringing talent, and we talk about this in Canada, talk about immigration and how important it is, but the right immigration. You want to bring in the right talent. You want to bring in, skilled trades or skill or talent that there's a gap where there's a gap in our country. So the U.S. should be is doing the same thing. They have been doing the same thing. However, it seems like this visa is one way of doing that because they have to have some level of skill, but it sounds like it's being exploited. And I guess the Trump administration is construing it as taking jobs away from Americans. So the question is are these jobs, does the US have the individuals, the skilled individuals to fill these jobs themselves? And it's a set number, 85,000. They're granting 85,000 visas a year. We could probably figure out exactly what the criteria is in terms of the skill set for these individuals. I guess, does the US have those individuals?
Right.
If they do, then what Trump is doing makes sense. I think, if the U.S. has these individuals, and that, why not give the jobs back to the U.S. residents rather than, foreign immigrants?
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys can see this chart. So this is again the prospective visa applications, and it starts off in the early 2000s with this 85,000 cap figure, and then something changes, and I don't understand what. I have to do some research on these numbers, but again, the prospective application numbers just go through the roof to the point of 2023. The number was 483,000, almost 484,000 people.
Wow. So this is just the applications. This is not the visas granted.
Correct, but my understanding is that this is essentially the same thing as recipients, right? So again, the cap would have been the number of people that are given visas. So there's going to be way more applications than there are visas. So this isn't there's only 85,000 applications. It says that it's prospective applications, but my understanding is that the admissions are through the roof. And partially because of the Biden administration said we want to increase, or we want to allow a lot of this H-1B. If there's jobs, we want to fill those jobs. So yeah, get rid of that.
What do you think, Andrew? Like, what do you think about this? It's designed to bring in skilled trades, okay, or skilled, not just skilled trades. Sorry, skilled talent, I should say. It's designed to bring skilled talent. I think there's a benefit to bring skilled talent into a country, especially if that country is in growth mode. They're growing. Maybe the talent pool isn't as robust, and they need to bring it up. I think it's good to bring in immigration, but if you have those people that aren't working, then that's a different story.
Yeah, I think there's always competition, especially in the U.S. where the economy is so well diversified. They do need talents. So in particular, the tech space, there's a lot of tech talents, researchers that are outside of the U.S. In Canada and China and Europe, like all over the place. So I think attracting these individuals, and $100,000, I think to some of these companies is a drop in the bucket. So for them to pay 100,000 to attract top talent is not gonna break the bank for them. But you're right that this will discourage a lot of those, like I guess, talents that are doing less research work, and doesn't command a high salary, or the type of work that they're doing is available inside the country. Then paying that $100,000 price tag might be a lot, may not be worth it. So it forces the company to start hiring within the country. So I think it makes sense in a way, because it's essentially allowing companies to kind of start thinking about that $100,000 as an expense in hiring talents outside of the country and bringing them in. Before actually, bringing them, they would actually evaluate if that individual is truly, exception, or exceptional in their field of work, then that $100,000 is a drop in the bucket for them. Like imagine, Meta hiring AI talents, paying millions, for them. So $100,000 is not really something they would even consider as a big expense, right?
So I guess the 100,000 would kind of be the deterrent for companies to hire these individuals if they couldn't find them here, like, or if they could find them here. So if they could find them here, why pay the extra $100,000 US? But if they can't, and it's someone that's, of very high caliber coming from outside the country, then it makes total sense to pay that $100,000. So it seems like it has all these mechanisms built into it, the H-1B, and I'm learning more about it. It's very interesting. Kyle's right. Like I'm looking at the submissions. It's wild. Maybe we could talk about why the submissions have doubled and tripled over the last few years, but I did confirm that it's still 85,000 new applicants that they admit annually under this visa. 65,000 of those are under the regular cap, and then there's another 20,000 set aside for those with advanced degrees from US institutions. So it sounds like if these individuals went to the US for their schooling at an advanced institution in the US, there's 20,000 of the lottery approvals allocated to them. So 65,000 regular lottery, then another 20,000 top up for these advanced degrees from the US institutions. Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. I think one other thing that I didn't realize until I looked at this a little bit more is that there's a lot of low-paying administrative jobs. Like some of the low-end salaries are in the 20,000 range. So there's no question that, and this actually dovetails with the Canadian temporary foreign worker program, which is essentially intended as something similar, where businesses that want to hire, let's say, laborers, they can't find somebody domestically. They're able to just essentially hire foreign workers, and this is a visa. This is an immigration scheme in Canada to allow foreign nationals to immigrate and work within this essentially this lower. This isn't AI data scientists. This is, typically it's low labor, low cost sort of workers. So it's interesting though, because the H-1B, there are a lot of low paid jobs. There are a lot of administrative jobs. There's been a lot of criticism as well for public sector jobs. So for example, municipalities and states that have postings, they're going out and hiring H-1B workers. And a lot of Americans are saying this is like ludicrous. Like we should make sure that if we're going to be spending our tax dollars on public servants, they're local American.
So I guess that's why Trump is basically implementing this new fee, because historically it was only $2,000 to $5,000 per petition, and now he's bumped it up to 100,000. I guess, Kyle, that would be the reason, correct?
Yeah, I would agree, and I do think that there's a lot of grift as well in those. They'll call them, a lot of people call them body shops, where essentially you've got this large outsourcing company, predominant, like the three top ones are out of India, and they're absolutely prolific. And we're talking like hundreds of thousands of people a year. And they're, again, it's essentially a subsidized rate. So they'll go to a large tech company and they'll charge, I don't know, $100 an hour or whatever. And the employee, the H-1B employee who's contracted with this outsourcing company will be paid $20 an hour or $40 an hour or whatever. And so that middleman, there's a ton of profit there. There's a ton of revenue. And to be clear, these companies were making huge amounts of money, $80 billion in revenue. Like, so this is big bucks.
So I get it now. Yeah, I get it. I get what's happening now. So that EB3, the reason why I was confused between the difference, the EB3, the criteria is you have to be a skilled worker, and there's a list of what type of industries apply. So I guess this H-1B is more like a catch-all. You don't need to qualify on that under that list of occupations, but you need to qualify. You need to hit the lottery, and then you have to get sponsored by the employer. And now there's this $100,000 cap. So I guess people that didn't qualify for the EB3 were going through this H-1B route, and that's why there was such a big mass application going through it. There was mass applicants going through it. And I guess the administration is doing what they're doing is smart. Basically, they're saying that, hey, you know what? rather than bringing in just any kind of labor or anybody. If you're going to bring someone in, you have to pay the $100,000, and that's like what do they call it? The smell check or whatever. Basically,
Yeah,
if
the
that
smell test.
person's
Yeah.
the smell test, yeah. Does it pass the smell test? If this person's really good and you can't find them here, you're going to be willing to pay $100,000, and that's the smell test. And if they don't, and you can find that worker here, or it's a lower paying job, why would you pay $100,000 extra to
Yeah.
bring that person in?
So it's
I
going to
think
be,
it makes total sense.
yeah, I
I
agree
love
with
it.
you. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the fallout is, but do we think that it's going to push foreign talent to other countries, potentially Canada? And does Canada have a soft landing or a way for them to even immigrate? Because I don't think that we do have, we have our scorecards and stuff like that, but based on what I've read recently, the federal government is definitely reducing the number of student visas. They're reducing the number of temporary foreign worker visas. We're going from something like 2 million. And I haven't been able to pull up the chart, but I came across a chart that said over the last 5 years, Canada across all streams has imported the equivalent of 20% of its total population. And I would be surprised, like provinces like Alberta, we're seeing like 500,000 arrivals, which is for a province of, let's say, 3 million. That's a huge amount of people.
Kyle, can you run the stats on how those individuals are coming to Canada? Like, it'd be interesting to know, the demographics or the statistics, sorry, the statistics on how these individuals are coming here. Like, what percentage are coming as student visas? What percentage are coming on work visas? What percentage are coming on, ownership visas, like a company, starting up companies here? Because in the US, you can go in on those different paths. Starting a company, you're a skilled trade, you're going to school, you're marrying a U.S. citizen. Like those are kind of the paths. What were the common funnels or routes into Canada over the last few years?
Yeah. So if we just look at let's say last year, so this total here has 490,000, and they've split it into economic migrants. So again, skilled workers, temporary foreign workers, stuff like that. Anything that's sort of business related. So that's just over half. And then family reunification. So this is another thing that actually I've heard a lot of people locally have been ruffled some feathers. So essentially what the federal government allows with family reunification is that if you're here on a visa or you've become a permanent resident or whatnot, you're allowed to sponsor to bring your family over. And they actually went out and said, like, we're encouraging you to do this. So roughly 100,000 new arrivals were within the family reunification family class. Roughly 60,000 were humanitarian or refugee. And then there's a subcategory for French speaking. I don't know what that program would be. It doesn't fall into specifically economic or family, and that's another 30,000. So roughly 500,000, and then the last few years it's been over 400,000 every year.
So those statistics they paint quite the picture, don't they? They tell us a lot. Yeah, they tell us a lot.
I would have thought that it was more, to be honest. Like the numbers that I saw, again, across all different schemes, and those numbers don't include student visas, right? So let's not forget that. Let me just try and pull up the student visas, because that's a huge amount of people entering the country.
Yeah, I think the family one, the student visa's massive. The family one's very large, and obviously, refugees is a big one too. At one point, Canada was taking on a lot of refugees, especially during some of the conflict in Syria and certain places like that. They were taking on a lot of refugees, so that was a big avenue of immigration. But I'd like to know family, the definition of family. Is it extended family, immediate family? Like if I came here to Canada, and I was say from the UK, can I bring my parents? Can I sponsor my parents to come? How about
Yes.
my siblings?
Okay. So
How about my
yes,
cousins?
definitely. Any of your dependent family, like immediate family. So here's a couple other numbers. So student visa permits January 2024, so the same year as the figures I just read off, was 1,023,000. So over 1 million students. As well, those numbers, the economic numbers, didn't include the temporary foreign worker, which was 1.5 million. So we're nearly 3 million for just 2024.
How is that possible? That's like 10% of our population
Yeah.
in 1 year. Like
Where are these individuals going, and where are they coming from? Do you know?
Well, I don't have arriving location, but a large number of the temporary foreign workers are South Asia and Pacific Asia, so Philippines, Thailand, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. The student visas are hugely overrepresented by India, and part of the criticism is that there's some really shady Canadian universities, education institutions.
I read about that. I read there was a big feature on that a couple of weeks ago about these these educational institutions. They're popping up in strip plazas, like it's all over the place.
But very similar sort of revenue to the body shop model, where they'll bring somebody over. The student will pay this company $100,000, and then the company will split that with the university. Like the tuition that these universities are charging has absolutely no correlation to the education or the potential degree, if they do even offer degrees. So it's really just, a lot of people, I think rightfully so, believe that this is just a scheme to get people in the country. And then there's a lot of times in the defense of the students, they've been lied to. Right? They think that they're going to the land of milk and honey, and they're going to go study and get a job and get a degree. And they realize that, these universities or these education establishments are just there to make a buck. So there's a lot of shadiness going on, and there's the intermediaries and the consultants and, whatever you want to call them, that are helping, again, charging people locally in these countries to come and do a program and whatever, and promising them jobs and riches.
So what happened to the students? Like, what are they like? If they've been lied to, like, what happened to them? Like, what do they do? What are they doing in
So
the?
I've heard a story, and I don't know how many of these are out there, but like there's some that are homeless. There's some that essentially they show up with a little bit of money, and they're expecting that this is going to be this big opportunity that they were promised, and their families have put together sometimes $50,000 in fees just to get here, and they'll handle the application and all that kind of stuff. And anyways, it's really shady. And so temporary foreign workers is similar. Like, again, 1.5 in 1 year. The whole justification for temporary foreign workers is similar to the low end H-1B, which is you can't find anybody locally to do your fast food, your laborer, your harvester type jobs. And ideally we help build the economy. These companies produce more jobs by bringing in cheap labor. But what's it really doing to the economy? And again, to your point, Andrew, like, where are these people living? There's huge stress on the public system in terms of medical and education and stuff like that. Especially,
I'm glad you brought that up. Like, how about the system? Like, the system cannot support the people that they're bringing in. This is a public system in Canada. Canada has public health, a lot of publicly subsidized services that are made available to everyone that is in this country and on a visa or as a resident. A lot of visa holders have access to these services as well. So, something's going to break. So Canada needs to look at this and review the mechanisms they put in place. They're obviously being exploited or they're being abused. They need to be revamped, and we need to focus on, controlling the quality that's coming in, and ensuring that when these individuals come in, they're coming in for a better life. You're right. They're coming here thinking that there's milk and honey, and that's the dream they're sold on. And then when they come here, they see that they have to wait hours to get into a hospital. They have to pay through the nose for groceries. Transportation is not available. Public transit is not developed. We're in the GTA here. The public transit system is overburdened. It's weakened. You're waiting on highways for hours in traffic. We have to be diligent in how many immigrants we're bringing in and how they're contributing to the economy, because the system needs resources put back into it so we could build it up. The infrastructure isn't there to support that. That's crazy. $3 million people a year just on those visas. That's 10% of the country. That's ridiculous.
So there's been a lot like a rise in crime, in around the city, the GTA. What do you guys think? Is there a correlation or a connection between these two? What do you guys think? So, do you think there's a correlation between these two things, or
100%. 100%.
Yeah, I do think like there's actually I'll have to pull it up and talk about it another time because I won't be able to find it now. But there's a Nordic study that was done talking about the impact that immigrants from other countries, again, multicultural immigration, has on that sort of cohesive, high trust society, especially again in Denmark was where the study was based. And I don't think anybody would argue that if you have a sort of a different population that doesn't necessarily share the same culture and same values, if you dump them on a city, especially if they're sort of gathered together, there's not a lot of incentive for integration and assimilation within the local culture. Like I think you just get issues, and I see it locally. I'm sure you guys see it more prevalently in Ontario because it's just a bigger population and Toronto's much smaller. But like it. I can't see how you get away from that though. Like if you're going to bring people in, they're not going to know the culture. They're not going to know the rules. And oftentimes if they're insulating themselves in that little sub pocket of their own culture, there's not going to be any reason or need for them to change.
And think about the how tough the economy is as well. They're coming here, and if they can't find jobs or they can't find work or they can't afford rent to rent a condo here in the GTA, you need, one bedroom condo is like $2,500, $3,000 a month. If they can't make that $3,000 a month rent and a couple $1,000 in groceries a month, amongst many other crazy expenses, what are they going to do? A lot are turning to crime.
Well, and the other thing is like, it's a really interesting point about what are we expecting these these migrants to do. So last time I was actually in Toronto, I took an Uber and the guy was from India. He just arrived like within the last year. And I said, well, like, how do you like it? Like, where are you living? All that kind of stuff. And he said he's sharing a basement, 1-bedroom flat with 8 other people. And he's quote unquote going to school. And he was driving an Uber because he couldn't get a job and there was nothing else for him to do. And he said the benefit of those large cities like Toronto is that obviously you can make more money, but it also costs a lot more. So if you can manage your outgoings by living with 8 people and probably 500 or 600 square feet, like, it's much more manageable. Whereas like, but the local people would say, the local Canadian young people would say, well, I can't do that. Like, I'm not going to share the cost of a 1 bed with 6, 7 other people. And the cost of those units are still going up or because the demand is there. So I don't know. It's a really interesting, it's a provocative question to say, like, do we want a high trust society? Like, what are we expecting that our culture will remain if we're importing 10% of different cultures every year? Or are we going to undermine, what it is, like, again, the society that we want to see and like our
Talking about culture and patriotism, like how do you guys feel the Canadian culture and Canadian patriotism has been? Like I don't know, like in Ontario, I'll speak for Ontario, it's been pretty weak. I think we can all agree. Like maybe it's different out west where you are, Kyle. Like how is it in Alberta and Calgary?
Oh, it's all-time low, right? Like that's why we have this big separatist movement right now, is that people are not, and to be totally honest with you, I would agree with the sentiment myself personally. Like I would align more with being an Albertan than being a Canadian, right? And you see, especially out here, you see a lot of people with like stickers on their cars, which is an upside down Canadian flag, which is pretty dramatic, and it's only happened in the last few years. But that's the sort of sentiment, is like, I'm not Canadian. I don't align. I don't agree with these values. I'm Albertan, and I'm for the province, and I'm for my local, my local sort of community, which is interesting.
Only imagine you take that and you add on half a million immigrants a year, and what do you get? Like, this just completely decimates the patriotism and the culture. And yeah, we're feeling it. Like, I'm sure, Andrew, you see it as well. A lot of Canadians I talk to, second, third, fourth generation Canadians, are just, I've never seen them at this level where they're just not proud. That sense of pride. I remember back then there was that pride of being Canadian. Like, it was, you were proud to be Canadian. And I don't know, it's sad to say, but it's
I used to have my my Canadian
diminishing.
flag on my backpack as I was traveling through Europe and Asia. You know, like that's how proud I was.
I'll be a bit of a contrarian. I think we can get back there. Like, I think the reality is all three of us are from very different, like our grandparents and above are from very different cultures, obviously. And, we all sort of celebrate what we grew up in Canada knowing. And we like that culture. I think one couple things. So I talked about this with my kids recently because they had something to do with culture, Canadian culture at school and so forth. And I think our generation was the first one that we really didn't identify very clearly, like what we liked about Canada and what we felt we were really proud about being Canadians until we saw some challenge to it or the potential that we're going to lose that. And I think just the knowledge that like it does exist, like we're not this like vacuum of culture and we don't have any culture and stuff like that, which is kind of what I learned growing up. Like there wasn't any sort of clear Canadian values. But the other thing is that I do think that the people that are moving here, there's a lot of I consider myself very lucky that I've met quite a few immigrants, including from India and Sri Lanka, and one guy specifically that I worked with who he chose not to live in the part of the city where all of his other compatriots, national people from his country lived, and he's like, I don't want to not I don't want I don't want not to integrate. I need
You want to assimilate.
I want to I want to assimilate. I want to learn the language. His wife barely spoke English. She speaks English great now. Anyway, so there's a lot of people that I've met like that where they 100% come to Canada as first generation immigrants and they're like, I want to be Canadian. I want to do what it takes to be Canadian. I'm interested. There are unfortunately I would guess a small number, a subset of people that migrate that absolutely don't want that don't have that interest and don't have that desire. And I think it's going to be really hard to identify the two and try and filter out one. And Alberta's kind of talking about how we can go about doing that, but I think it's going to be really, really, really hard. I think what's easier is if all of us Canadians are probably a little bit louder than we normally are and just sort of say like, hey guys, like this isn't acceptable or this is how you should do it. Like I said that to a guy that was clearly a new Canadian who parked in a handicap spot. And I was like, you can't park here. This is a handicap spot. Like you should know this. I didn't say this, but like in the back of my head, I'm like, you should know this if you have a driver's license. But like, again, high trust society, like these are things that we actually, it's a rule for a reason and we expect it to be upheld. And so I do think, yes, numbers are probably going to have to come down just for like the social system that we talked about. But I think in the next generation, I think we'd be surprised at how, if we sort of stand up for ourselves and say, wait a second, this is like, we want to maintain this culture. I think you'll be surprised at how quickly people start to assimilate and say like, I do like this, or I don't like the conflict of like, throwing litter in the river. People are going to shout at me and I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to stop throwing litter in the river.
Do you think, Kyle, like during this assimilation period, if the actual Canadians decide to leave, what's left of that culture? What happens, at that point? Like, what do you think?
So I do think that there's going to be critical mass. I expect that there will be critical mass still to maintain that culture. What I have seen, and I would no doubt expect to happen in Canada, is certain jurisdictions, if they're predominantly like over 75-80% a different culture, then there's no chance that Canadian culture is going to hang on, right? Like, and this is what we see in parts of every city. The Calgary has the same issue where there are communities that attract a certain demographic, a certain culture, certain nationality, certain ethnicity, and it helps prevent them from assimilating, because they're only going to speak the same language. I saw this actually when I grew up in Edmonton as well, where there were communities where they would grow up in Canada and they would never learn English because they would never need to learn English, because everything that they knew and everything that they had locally is all that they needed. And it's ironic because in England, I spent a bunch of time in London. England actually have a policy where they pay whatever the cost, even if it's in posh Mayfair, they will move migrants to different areas so that they get away from that ghetto type environment where everybody is, piled on top of one another and there's no ability to assimilate. They want to spread people out. It costs them a ton of money because, again, they have to be able to rent accommodation, provide accommodation all over the city. But it does, arguably, it does a better job of saying, hey, you can't just keep leaning on the people that and your native tongue and the native culture. Like, you actually have to get out and do stuff.
Don't you think that would push the local, like let's just say you move it to posh Mayfair, like do you think that would push those individuals outside of that area and be, hey, you know what, I'm gonna leave, because those are the people with options. They
I
would.
guess that it's the type of immigrants they're bringing in at that point, Andrew. So the quality, and I know it's tough to filter that quality, like Kyle said, but you can always play on education. You can always use education. You can use profession as kind of somewhat of a filter. I know it's not perfect, but yeah, if you're getting like really low quality individuals coming, yeah, definitely going to push them out. I agree with you, Andrew.
Yeah.
But
So
if, yeah.
one point I wanted to clarify is I am definitely 100% in favor of the previous scorecard that we had as a country. Like, I think we did for 20 years, we did immigration really well.
We did.
You typically were
What was
younger.
the scorecard? Why did it work so well when we were bringing in,
It was
you
a lot
know,
tougher. It was a
So
lot
you had to be, the scorecard was essentially you had to hit a certain number of points, and you were given points based on age, education, career,
language?
income. I don't think you were given, oh, probably you were for English language skills, but I think you actually had to pass, depending on the province, you actually had to pass an English test.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah, you had to
Yeah.
pass an English test. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, so if people weren't young, educated, and had relatively high incomes, or the prospect of a high income in Canada, they just simply weren't allowed to immigrate. Right. And the vast majority of people that immigrated to Canada over the last 20, 30 plus years have been a massive, net benefit to Canada. And I think most people would agree with that. The problem becomes when you start admitting people from different, like we've talked about these different schemes, where they may not actually have an interest in actually settling in Canada. They may come here for a bunch of money. They may want to make some money and send it back home and then go back home in 5 or 10 years, which is their prerogative, but they're not going to be like, oh, well, I want to learn the language and I want to learn the culture. And to your point, Andrew, I think what we've seen in multiple countries is the domestic population, if they feel like they're getting pushed out or there's a reason for them to leave, they leave en masse. Like, England is a really interesting example, and I don't know why I have so many stats from England, but they lose more millionaires than they can mint every year. So there's essentially, the people that they're bringing in are typically low, like, and they have a huge problem with illegal immigration, which is a totally different subject, especially in the US. They have a huge issue with illegal immigration, and they haven't been able to get a handle of it. Illegal immigration is predominantly, again, low skill, no language skills, no education, and often leads to a huge increase in crime because there's just simply nothing else for them to do. That is pushing out the number of people that are coming in. There's pushing out a lot of people. The people that are leaving are predominantly well-educated, wealthy people.
Where are they going? I'd love to know where they're going. Probably other parts of Europe, I would imagine.
Well, a lot of them currently are going to Singapore. They were going to Hong Kong, and then now a lot of them are going to Singapore, Kuala Lumpur. A lot are going to the US. There's a huge amount of Europeans in general that are going to the US. And if we should do another episode on the huge demographic problem Europe has, because all of their young talent, like the brain drain that we suffer from in the US is one thing, like Europe is really on its knees. Like, the vast majority of educated, well-educated people from Europe are moving elsewhere. But anyways, to your point, Andrew, like, I do think that it's a concern and it's an issue. And I think I read something like there were 200,000 or 300,000 Canadians that left permanently last year. So there are a large number of people that are leaving, and we don't know, again, how much wealth they're taking with them. But typically those that can do.
So I think that's probably a very big issue that Canada needs to address ASAP, because who are they replacing these individuals with, right? Are they replacing these individuals that are leaving, and they're bringing in people of the same caliber, or what, right? Like we need to have a handle on that, because listen, if we're losing millionaires and we're bringing in someone who's struggling, that's going to be a problem for us.
Yeah, for the tax base especially. Yeah, I agree. So let's take the next 10 minutes before we wrap. Let's talk about, again, like, Mike, you want to talk about leadership and what we can do, especially in a company culture and stuff like that. Like, coming back to my thought about, like, we just need to be a little bit more vocal. How do we feel about, again, setting an example of saying, like, this is what we value, this is what we pride ourselves on. We're going to put up, we're a pretty passive culture to begin with. Maybe we need to speak up a little bit and say, actually, no, that is a Canadian value. We believe strongly in that. You're welcome to come here, and we love people that want to, support this culture in this country and work hard. And if you don't, then maybe we should have a more difficult conversation and say, this isn't the place for you, because that is perceived as being xenophobic right now. I think it's changing, but it definitely 10 years ago was xenophobic. So what do you think we can do as leaders?
Even less than 10 years ago, it was considered xenophobic.
Yeah. Being generous. What can we do? Where would you start in your leadership training?
Are you talking about in terms of instilling Canadian values, or leadership as an employer?
As an employer, how do you lead? You're a leader. What do you value? What are your priorities as a leader?
People. Basically prioritizing people and developing people. Like, a good leader is quite the shift of topic, but yeah, I guess I'll try to switch gears into leadership mode now after talking politics and immigration. Yeah, a good leader really is someone who can develop really good talent, other good leaders. And how do you develop other good leaders? By giving them, believing in them, giving them the space to develop and grow, not being there. And this is something maybe a good topic we could talk about. I've been sharing it a lot with the team, actually, is not always giving your team the answers to the questions. A lot of business owners and a lot of leaders, they fall prey to this. They build a business. They're the subject matter expert, and we're experiencing this as well. They have a subject matter expert in the business, and they build the business around them. They're the superstar. Everything goes through them. Whenever there's a problem, they involve this individual. What do we do here? This individual gets involved. What do we do there? This individual gets involved. There's a big deal. The individual gets involved. The problem is you're not really building. That's not a business. That's just a job where you're this person on a pedestal. But at the end of the day, that individual is a bottleneck in the business. So a good leader is the person that can build the mechanisms, the team, the systems and the processes where these things no longer need to flow through them. So how do you do that? You create, you don't feed them the answers. When anyone comes to you with questions, and Andrew's good at this, you can respond with a question. I never used to do this, and I hated doing it because it's so annoying when you need an answer to something and someone's like, "Oh, what do you think?" It's frustrating, but it gets you thinking. And that's what we need. We need a culture of thinkers. If you want to breed leaders need to be able to think on their own independently, think strategically, think critically. And if you're always giving them the answers, there's no way they're ever going to be able to do that. They need to switch gears and start thinking critically. How can I get to the solution? And then you could just help them get there. And they may not get there immediately, but then you could prompt it with more questions, more learning, more development, without still giving them the answer. Okay, what are some other alternatives we can consider? This is what you think. I think it's a good idea, but what are some alternatives to that? Or have you considered, any other alternatives? So that's been something I've been trying to practice recently. It's been very difficult because I always love to just jump to the conclusion. I'm a subject matter expert, so I know the answers to the things in my domain, but now I need to get to a point where I can evolve and be that leader where I can create subject matter experts and I could create other good leaders. What do you guys think?
That's interesting, Mike. I think you're doing an excellent job at that. So, it's definitely a challenge, when you have to develop other leaders to think and operate at your caliber. I think a lot of us fall prey to the thinking that, hey, you know what, everything has to be done exactly how we want it, 100% the way we want it. But I think leaders out there have to really understand that you have to accept that it may only be 70%, 80% of what you actually do, right? And to expect that 100%, you'll always be in the weeds. You always end up doing the work because you'll never be satisfied. So I think coming to realization and accepting the fact that, the work may not be done exactly the way you want it, but it's going to improve, right? It's going to be 75% next year. It's going to be 80% next year. As long as you're seeing that progress and that improvement, I think it's moving in the right direction. And
Yeah.
developing leaders is definitely a challenge.
Well said.
So
Well said. Well said. Yeah, that takes a lot of patience, right? It's very easy to give the answer. It's like a quick dopamine hit. You solve the problem quickly, but doing what you're saying, Andrew, requires patience, which is very difficult, and restraint. And a lot of individuals, and myself included, it's hard to restrain yourself from just jumping in there and doing it yourself or giving the answer. And it takes so much longer because you're right. It's like trial and error. And you're right. They're not going to perform at the caliber that you're at, but you can't expect that. And they will get there. I think that's great feedback.
yeah, it's like I like to think of it like kids. When we're learning how to ride a bike or anything, right? As parents, I remember my dad used to jump in and try to teach me because I'm making a mistake or something like that. But you never learn like that, right? But as soon as the training wheels come off, you're kind of forced to
You
either
scrape your
fall,
elbows. You have to
yeah,
scrape your elbows a few times.
yeah, and then you learn, right? You learn. I shouldn't fall off the bike because I'm going to hurt myself, right? But if without those failures, those falls, you never learn how to ride a bike. And I think leadership is the same thing. It's a skill. It's a trait that you need to develop. There needs to be given an opportunity, like what you said, Mike, is that room, that exposure to the freedom to do it, but the guidance and the training wheels along the way, and those training wheels needs to come off eventually.
What do you think,
So
Kyle? That's what's your take on this?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you both said. I thought those are really poignant examples. There's a couple things that I've tried over the years to try and implement, and it is hard. I agree with you, Mike. Like, I'm definitely one of these know-it-alls that if there's a problem that I can see that I can solve, I want to solve that problem. But there's two sort of things that I try and keep in the back of my mind. So one is what Andrew just touched on, which is, the ability to fail. And I like the parenting analogy because one of the things I struggle with my kids is, and I think everybody would, is when you see them about to make a mistake, your default is, hey, I want to help you avoid that mistake. I'm going to save you that pain. But the reality is that they need, like you say, they need that. And in many cases, children especially, like they don't even want your help. If it doesn't end well, then that's okay. That's part of the system. And I think that lesson is incredibly important. The sort of add on to that I think we as a business community don't do well enough is we don't enable people to fail. We don't allow them to fail and learn. We expect the same from them as we expect of ourselves, which is perfection all the time. And the reality is that we're good at what we are probably because we failed along the way and we were able to try again, and we were able to pick ourselves up, or somebody supported us and said that's okay, and we were able to keep iterating. And I think that's a really difficult thing to implement because, again, it requires failure, and you almost need to prime your team or whatever the activity is to say, hey, here's sort of two halves. Like, one half is like practice, or like the ability that you can fail and it's not going to blow up the biggest client relationship that we've got, right? We're not going to do high stakes stuff out the gate. And then you get some time to sort of cut your teeth and do other things and figure it out. And then there's sort of the other half, which is the performance half, which is to say, okay, like now you need to perform. There's major, consequences and stuff like that. So I think if we do a better job, where one of the things I try and do is find those opportunities for, really, really low risk failure. Like, let's try something here that really doesn't have a lot of long-term sort of impact, and let's try stuff, let's iterate and figure it out. And then if there's situations where ideally you put those people in those high stress, high risk situations as well, because they have to learn that performance side as well. But again, if it doesn't work out, it's, you know, it's not the end of the world. That's how we develop. So yeah, I think that's definitely something in my mind that's changed, and I'm drawing from people that I've worked with that I really like. But that's what it's going to take for especially the younger generation. Like, they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And to just add on to what you're saying, Kyle, what Andrew and I use at Boardwalk is we use the analogy of a tree. And you know, I don't know if you've heard this analogy. You know, there's the leaf of the tree, which is like a very simple decision or simple task that, you know, if they mess it up, you just lose a leaf of the tree. They should take full ownership there without involving a leader. Then there's the branch, which is a little bit more critical of a tree, but again, they should be taking the lead on that branch decision and making the decision on their own, maybe involving a leader in just some questioning, like, hey, this is what I'm thinking of doing, what are your thoughts? But they should ultimately be making the decision. Then you get to the root, I mean the trunk. The trunk of the tree is critical. Now, like you're talking about, high stakes, could be a high client, could be a big financial decision, it could be part of a big annual plan. The trunk needs to involve you know, someone else, a leader at that point, in the decision-making process. And then there's the root decisions, which they may not even get to that point, a root decision. So we try to use that analogy just to give people space, give them much more space in the leaf decisions, more space on the branch decisions, but get more involved on things that are more trunk and root related. So we use that analogy. But I think the hard part for a lot of leaders, the difficult part for a lot of leaders, is striking that balance. You know, we talk about giving them space. We talk about allowing them to make decisions and take ownership of things. The thing is you can't just leave them on this island on their own as well. So that's where it's very difficult to find this balance where you're still there to give them the guidance, but you're also not, they're not relying on you and you're not doing part of their job for them. So for me, what helps me is I have like just a regular cadence of meeting for the individuals that report into me. I'll usually do a monthly one-on-one, and then that one-on-one meeting is very geared around some of those more critical decisions they're facing, such as the branch and the trunk decisions, and it's more geared around what they're facing and how I could help them get there without giving them the answers, with more of that questioning, at least so they know I'm still present, I'm still there to help them, but at the same time, I believe in them and they can make those decisions on their own. So I try to do that, just having a cadence of regular meetings to really talk about some of these more important things on their desk. And I encourage them to do that with the individuals that report into them as well. It helps. It helps.
Yeah, I like it. I like the analogy. I hadn't heard that before, but it makes total sense. And I think, you know, it's a great way to distinguish again for them to sort of say, like, look, we're on the same page. Like, I think one of the biggest challenges for any relationship is miscommunication, right? Misunderstanding what exactly are the expectations. Is this a performance-based task? Is this something that I need to show up? Or is this something that, you know, we can potentially have a little bit of wiggle room on? So I really like that classification. Cool. All right. Final thoughts before we break.
You guys close it off. Close it off. Andrew, Kyle.
Kyle, let's hear it.
Oh, I don't know. I think, yeah. Okay. So let's try and join the two. So we've got a lot of people, especially young people, coming into the country, and we're definitely going to cross paths with them in our futures, especially in a business context. I think we try and meld the two and we say, hey, we can be vocal and we can be, you know, firm and, you know, and supportive of, you know, our values and our beliefs and our culture, while at the same time allowing them to fail and allowing them to make mistakes and say, all right, try again. It's not the end of the world, but these are the expectations and you got to keep going at it. So maybe we can all try and implement that. All of our listeners can implement it as well. And we'll have to keep our finger on the pulse of this H-1B thing. Maybe there's going to be a surplus of amazing people coming and applying to our jobs.
Elegantly put. I like it.